The lecture hall was silent. Not the respectful kind of silence, the heavy kind, the kind that presses down on a room when everyone believes the answer has already been decided. Rows of students sat perfectly still, laptops open, pens hovering, eyes fixed forward. No one shifted in their seat. No one whispered. No one questioned what they were about to hear. At the front of the room stood one of the most respected linguists on earth, a man whose research had shaped how language was taught across continents, whose textbooks sat on shelves in universities from Europe to North America to Asia, a man whose theories were quoted, referenced, and rarely challenged. This wasn't just a lecture, it was authority speaking. He spoke without hesitation. Some languages, he said, were simply more sophisticated than others, not because of opinion, not because of culture, but because of structure, case systems, verb conjugations, rigid grammatical rules. These, he explained, were the marks of advanced civilizations, the linguistic evidence of intellectual development. Some cultures, he said, had built complexity over centuries, others had not. And the room accepted it. Heads nodded in agreement. Notes were typed rapidly. Assumptions were being reinforced, not questioned. After all, this was Yale, and this was expertise. No one expected the moment that came next. No one expected a challenge. Until, from the back of the hall, a single hand rose slowly into the air. Not dramatic, not defiant, just steady. And in that moment, without anyone realizing it yet, everything was about to change. Yale University, an advanced linguistics lecture, a room designed for certainty, tiered seating, high ceilings, centuries of academic confidence built into the walls. The professor was known for clarity, for logic, for confidence that rarely invited challenge. When he spoke, he didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. His reputation did the work for him. He spoke about Latin, its structure, its symmetry, its precise system of cases and endings, nouns that bent to function, verbs that bent to time, rules that left little room for ambiguity. According to him, this was what intellectual progress looked like. Order, hierarchy, predictability. Language, he explained, wasn't just communication, it was evidence. Evidence of civilization, evidence of advanced thought, evidence of which cultures had reached complexity, and which had not. The students nodded. Keys tapped softly on laptops. Pens moved across notebooks. Assumptions settled comfortably into place. This was Yale. This was expertise. No one questioned it. No one thought to. No one, except one student. Her name was Maria Santos, a graduate student. Quiet, careful, Filipino. She sat near the back, where students usually listened more than they spoke, where questions were rare, where challenges were almost unheard of. She didn't interrupt, didn't raise her voice, didn't try to sound clever. She waited for the pause. Then she lifted her hand. Slowly. When the professor noticed her, the room turned. Hundreds of faces shifted at once. She spoke calmly. What about Tagalog? The reaction was immediate. Not outrage, not anger, laughter, soft, surprised, dismissive. The kind of laughter that carries a message without saying it out loud. Tagalog, a language from the Philippines, compared to Latin? The professor smiled. Not cruelly, indulgently. He said her language was beautiful, expressive, emotionally rich, a language of stories, a language of feeling, but not sophisticated, not in the way that mattered, not in the way linguists measured advancement. Maria felt the heat rise to her face. Her ears burned, her chest tightened. She nodded once, lowered her hand, and just like that the lecture moved on, as if nothing had happened, as if the question had never mattered, as if the answer had already been decided. No one confronted her afterward. No one apologized. The lecture ended the way it always did, Chairs shifted. Laptops closed. Conversations resumed. Students filed out in small clusters, still talking about Latin, still repeating the professor's words as if they were settled fact. Some glanced at Maria as they passed. A few offered sympathetic looks, the kind meant to be kind, but only confirmed what they believed. Others didn't bother hiding their amusement. One voice drifted past her shoulder, low but clear. "That was cute." Maria kept her eyes forward. She didn't respond, didn't explain, didn't defend herself. She packed her notes slowly, carefully, as if nothing unusual had happened. Because she already knew something they didn't, something the lecture hadn't mentioned, something the laughter couldn't erase. And she knew that if she spoke now, it wouldn't matter. Not yet. For 3 years, Maria had been studying Tagalog grammar, not casually, not culturally, scientifically. Long nights, early mornings, endless pages of data. She didn't rely on intuition or nostalgia. She relied on evidence. She analyzed thousands of sentences, from everyday conversations, from literature, from historical records. She mapped verb forms with precision, tracked how meaning shifted with focus, with intent, with context. What she found didn't fit the narrative she had been taught. Tagalog didn't organize meaning around tense the way Latin did. It didn't obsess over when an action happened. It cared about how an action unfolded, aspect, who initiated it, whether it was completed, whether it was ongoing, whether the outcome mattered more than the actor. Meaning changed not just by time, but by perspective, by intention, by emphasis, by relationship between speaker and action. A single verb root could branch into dozens of precise meanings, nuances that Latin required entire constructions to approximate. Additional words, additional clauses. It wasn't chaotic. It was systematic. It wasn't vague. It was deliberate. It wasn't simpler. It was different. And in many ways, more precise. Maria didn't argue in class. She didn't raise her voice, didn't ask for another minute, didn't try to win the room with words. She didn't post online, didn't vent, didn't look for validation. She didn't accuse anyone of bias, didn't name the laughter, didn't explain how it felt. She went home, closed the door behind her, set her bag down, sat at her desk. Then she opened her files, folders stacked with years of work, notes written late at night, datasets most people had never bothered to look at. She began organizing 3 years of research into a single question. What happens when Tagalog and Latin are compared honestly, without hierarchy, without assumptions, without inherited bias? Charts took shape, tables aligned, verb roots unfolded into patterns, morphological breakdowns replaced opinion, structure replaced narrative. There was no anger in the work, no need to prove anyone wrong, only clarity, only evidence. She gave the paper a simple title, A Comparative Analysis of Verb Aspect Systems in Tagalog and Classical Languages. No drama, no exaggeration. Then she sent it out. And waited. She sent it to 5 linguists, not friends, not mentors who would be kind, the best in the world. People whose work defined the field, people whose approval meant scrutiny, not encouragement. Then she waited. No follow-ups, no reminders, no expectations. Days passed. Her inbox stayed quiet. Then slowly it changed. One message, then another, then several more. Harvard. This is exceptional. We need to discuss publication immediately. Stanford. These findings challenge assumptions many of us have taught for years. MIT. The complexity here has been underestimated for decades. Your methodology is rigorous. Each response was careful, measured, professional, and yet unmistakable. This wasn't curiosity. It was recognition. Word spread fast, not on social media, not in headlines, but through emails, peer reviews, Private academic conversations, quietly, academically, irreversibly. Conference panels shifted. Curricula were questioned. Assumptions once treated as fact began to feel fragile. The conversation had changed, and Maria hadn't said a word in public. The professor received the paper. It arrived like hundreds of others had over the years. Another submission, another challenge, another argument to evaluate. He skimmed the abstract, paused, then he read it once, slowly. He read it again, more carefully this time, then line by line, every chart, every pattern, every comparison laid out with precision. There was no rhetoric to dismiss, no emotional language to ignore, no shortcuts, only structure, only evidence. He turned pages well past midnight, cross-referenced examples, checked sources he himself had cited decades earlier. By dawn, the desk lamp was still on. That night, he didn't sleep, because the paper didn't just question a theory, it questioned a lifetime. The next morning, he picked up the phone. When Maria answered, his voice was different. Not dismissive, not authoritative, measured, careful. "Miss Santos," he said after a brief pause, "I've reviewed your work." Another pause. "I need to speak with you in person." He named the time. He named the place. Then he added quietly, "Please come to my office tomorrow." And when the call ended, Maria sat still for a long moment, knowing the conversation she had been denied in public was finally about to happen in private. His office walls were lined with awards, framed degrees, international honors, photographs from conferences around the world. Books he had written filled the shelves, theories he had taught for decades, ideas that had shaped how students everywhere understood language. When Maria entered, he didn't sit behind his desk. He stood, not in command, not in performance, in acknowledgement. For a long moment he said nothing. Then he spoke. "I've been wrong." The words landed heavily in the room. For 40 years, he explained, he had equated linguistic sophistication with European structure, with systems that resembled Latin, with frameworks inherited from Western academic tradition. Maria's work dismantled that. Not emotionally, not politically, scientifically. Her data didn't argue, it demonstrated. Tagalog wasn't lacking complexity, it wasn't informal, it wasn't incomplete, it expressed complexity differently, through focus, through aspect, through layers of meaning shaped by intent rather than time. He took a breath. Then he apologized. Not for the laughter in the lecture hall, not for the moment itself, for the assumption that had guided his thinking for decades, an assumption he could no longer defend. The department reacted quickly. Meetings were called. Emails circulated. Decisions were made faster than anyone expected. Maria was invited to present. Not in a classroom, not in a seminar room, in the main auditorium. The same auditorium, the same seats, the same space where her question had once been dismissed. This time, she didn't raise her hand. She walked to the podium. She didn't ask permission, didn't frame a challenge, didn't soften her language. She delivered evidence. Charts filled the screen. Patterns unfolded methodically. Verb systems aligned and contrasted with precision. There was no rhetoric, no accusation, only structure. When she finished, no one clapped. At first, the room was silent. Not the heavy silence of certainty, but the fragile silence of realization. Then someone stood. Then another. Then the entire room followed. The professor sat in the front row. No notes, no interruption, listening, learning. Universities reached out. Not with curiosity, with urgency. Departments requested her data. Scholars asked for her methodology. Conferences cleared space for her work. Textbooks were rewritten. Chapters once treated as settled were reopened. Examples were revised. Hierarchies quietly removed. New courses were introduced, courses that compared languages without ranking them, that studied structure without cultural bias, that treated non-Western languages as systems of knowledge, not footnotes. A global initiative was formed. Its purpose was simple, but overdue, to study languages outside the Western canon with equal rigor, without hierarchy, without inherited assumptions. Maria was asked to lead it. At 28, not because of symbolism, not because of representation, because her work had made the framework possible. Her language wasn't validated by applause, not by praise, not by sentiment. It was validated by structure, and structure doesn't argue. It endures. Back home, her parents opened a package. It had traveled far, across oceans, across institutions that once dismissed the language they spoke every day. Inside was a textbook, heavy, carefully bound, its title stamped in clean academic type. They turned the pages slowly, not skimming, not rushing, until they reached the dedication. On the first page, written simply, were the words, "To those who were told their language was less." Her mother paused. "Read it again. Your words carry history." Her father adjusted his glasses. "Your grammar carries wisdom." They looked at each other before finishing the last line. "Never let anyone decide your value for you." Neither spoke for a moment. The language they had taught her at the dinner table. The words passed down by grandparents. The grammar learned not from books, but from life. It was all there now, recognized, recorded. Maria's accent never changed. She didn't need it to, because the world had finally learned to listen.